So, not as usual for um, every day. Today I didn't sleep at around 8 p.m. to 10 since I had to cut my hair. Mm. So I finished one chapter of um, this class. So I'm gonna finish one class at the moment, and then move on to read a book, 30 pages, and then we'll come back to this chapter again to finish my study. Let's get going.
Microservices provide us a lot of benefits, particularly in the form of isolation. However, they also introduce some complexity into our application. We saw when we talked about the difference between monoliths and microservices that whichever option you pick, you're going to have advantages and disadvantages. Well, one of the disadvantages of microservices is they can create complexity, particularly in your client application. So how does that work? Well, if you think about monolith, back when we were building with monoliths, we would make a single request from the client to the monolith. That monolith then probably needed information from a number of different locations, different tables. What it would do is it would do a join typically on those tables in order to access that information, and then it would present it to the client. Now that's a relatively simple process. The client just makes one request, it deals with one failure. But when we move into microservices, that gets more complex because now that information is not contained within any one microservice. It's potentially contained within multiple microservices. You can't just do a database join because that violates the principles of isolation. It means that you're no longer isolating your state. So what we need to do now is the client actually needs to make individual calls to each microservice. Then it needs to aggregate the information and then present it. Now that means that the client needs to know about each of the different microservices. It needs to know they exist. It needs to deal with potential failures from each of those microservices, which again is additional complexity that we don't want to deal with. So what has happened now is that all that complexity that used to be handled by the monolith has moved into the client. Why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because clients are usually harder to update. If it's something like an iPhone app or an Android app, we can't guarantee that a user is going to update that app. They may not. It also means that in order for them to update that app, we have to go through Apple or we have to go through Google or whoever in order to provide the update. It's no longer under our control. And that means that we're stuck in this situation where if we want to deprecate a microservice or move it or add an additional microservice, we can't do that until we ensure that all the clients are up to date. And we don't know how long that could take. So that's a problem, and it's a problem that we want to try to solve. So the question is, how can we manage these complex APIs that may access many microservices? We do that using what we call a gateway service or an API gateway service. Now, API gateway services to our application. We saw when we talked about the difference between monoliths and microservices that whichever option you pick, you're going to have advantages and disadvantages. Well, one of the disadvantages of microservices is they can create complexity, particularly in your client application. So how does that work? Well, if you think about monolith, back when we were building with monoliths, we would make a single request from the client to the monolith. That monolith then probably needed information from a number of different locations, different tables. What it would do is it would do a join typically on those tables in order to access that information, and then it would present it to the client. Now that's a relatively simple process. The client just makes one request, it deals with one failure. But when we move into microservices, that gets more complex because now that information is not contained within any one microservice. It's potentially contained within multiple microservices. You can't just do a database join because that violates the principles of isolation. It means that you're no longer isolating your state. So what we need to do now is the client actually needs to make individual calls to each microservice. Then it needs to aggregate the information and then present it. Now that means that the client needs to know about each of the different microservices. It needs to know they exist. It needs to deal with potential failures from each of those microservices,
Mm-hmm.
which again is additional complexity that we don't want to deal with. So what has happened now is that all that complexity that used to be handled by the monolith has moved into the client. Why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because clients are usually harder to update. If it's something like an iPhone app or an Android app, we can't guarantee that a user is going to update that app. They may not. It also means that in order for them to update that app, we have to go through Apple or we have to go through Google or whoever in order to provide the update. It's no longer under our control. And that means that we're stuck in this situation where if we want to deprecate a microservice or move it or add an additional microservice, we can't do that until we ensure that all the clients are up to date. And we don't know how long that could take. So that's a problem, and it's a problem that we want to try to solve. So the question is, how can we manage these complex APIs that may access many microservices? We do that using what we call a gateway service or an API gateway service. Now, API gateway services are essentially just microservices, other microservices that we put between our individual microservices and our client. So our
Mm-hmm.
client now makes a request to the gateway service, and then the gateway service knows about all the individual services that it needs to talk to in order to fulfill that request. So we could do something like have just a client application gateway service that handles all the requests. We can also make it a little more specific to the individual purpose that we're trying to do, a little more domain oriented. So we could, for example, for the driver's delivery application, we could have a delivery gateway service, for example. They can be domain specific, they can be more general if necessary. But basically, what happens now is the client makes a request to the gateway service. The gateway
Mm-hmm.
service makes all the individual requests, aggregates the results, passes it back to the client. Then, if a failure occurs on one of the individual services, the gateway service is responsible for figuring out how to deal with that failure. And that may mean surfacing that failure back to the client, but it may also mean that the gateway service has some sort of logic that allows it to recover from that failure. For example, it might cache some of the data and fall back to a stale cache in the event that the data is not available. That's an
Mm-hmm.
option that we could use in the gateway service. So basically what we are doing here, though, is we're creating an additional layer of isolation between our client and our individual microservices. And as we've already established, more isolation generally is a good thing. So that is one of the primary goals of being reactive, is to make things more isolated. And this gives us a way to do that.
Okay. So main topic here is to how to add some layer so the customer can use the end microservices without having issue. So true false microservice based on based systems are inherent means um, basically as it's born inherently less complex than a monolith system. Less complex. Uh, so when saying about the complexity, even though the microservice itself is very simple to solve one issue, I'm not sure about this question if it is asking only the specific part of the microservices or the asking about the whole system. While the microservice is separating certain part of the solution as a service, but still we need to have some portion of the problem solving as a microservice, which eventually will be a whole system. Um, so inherently less complex than monolithic systems. So let's think about the um, complex. Microservices provides us a lot of benefits, particularly in the form of isolation. However, they also introduce some complexity into our application. Yes. Uh, well, one of the disadvantages of microservices is they can create complexity. So if we use the monolith system, it could be very simple because while we are having lots of components in one exe file or running process, it can access to any data at once, and within that system, it just solve all things together as synchronized, which means once it is separated, we need to have some connection between this information and this information out of the upper layer, which is a microservice. Then from the customer point of view or client point of view, we need to go to this microservice to get certain information and go to the other microservice to get that information, and then mix together to have a meaningful answer out of those two systems. So this one, its answer is false. Monolith applications typically aggregate data by monolithic application typically aggregate data by leveraging a separate component or service that'll make all the appropriate calls and aggregate the results. Leveraging a separate component. We don't have a separate component for the monolith system or service that will make all the appropriate calls and aggregate the results. Making separate API calls to different areas of the application and then aggregating the data in the monolith. So this part, the ask and making separate API calls to different areas, no, it is all in the one area, requiring multiple API calls from the client, which will then aggregate the data, collecting the data from the database using techniques such as join or views where necessary. That was the easy question. Aggregating data with microservices. In the absence of a gateway service, when data needs to be aggregated from multiple microservices, a client will typically be unable to complete the request. Uh, shouldn't be an answer, because if we cannot, if it is unable to complete the request, it means that the whole system will be failed. Request the data from a single microservice. Request the data from a single microservice. That microservice will make the individual requests and aggregate the result. Microservice doesn't do anything about the other data or the other components. It only answers by itself, by its own. Perform a join on the data in the database is the way of the monolith service is using. Perform each request in the client and then aggregate the result. Problem with client complexity. increasing the complexity of a client Android app, iPhone app is problematic because it becomes harder to deprecate old microservices or API. Deprecate means that um, deprecate. No, it doesn't necessary to use the newest version of the API as far as it works. Uh, Clients are not guaranteed to ever update. Updates are controlled by a third party. Doesn't matter. It can be or it cannot. All of the above, none of the above. It becomes harder to deprecate old microservices or API. So I guess all of them. Huh. I can easy to understand that this one is an answer. Clients are not guaranteed to ever update. Okay, updates are collected by a third party. Okay, it becomes harder to deprecate old microservices or APIs. Deprecate. Okay. Um, a gateway service is What is a gateway service? Gateway service is a intermediate service that connect the client between the client and the um, peer of the microservice. A microservice that is responsible for managing security and ensuring that only authorized the users access the system. No a wrapper around an external service to prevent domain concerns from leaking between bounded contexts. No, a microservice that knows how to aggregate data from other services in order to fulfill a request. That should be the answer. Wait a second. A wrapper around an external service from leaking between bounded contexts because the microservice itself should work, um, should have those uh, authentication and then authorization and then preventing the leaking, because if that has some issue, and then it means that by itself have some issue. So in that case, while it is possible to use the gateway service, but still it is okay also possible to use directly to the microservice then, which will cause an issue. So I would this one only is the answer. True or false? A gateway service is always tied to a particular area. A gateway service is always tied to a particular area, bounded context of the domain. Gateway service is always tied to a particular area, bounded context of the domain. Should it be? Hmm. For example, if I am dealing with the customer and the other one is order, and then this one has its bounded context for the user, and then this one has the uh, the order. Then for aggregate those two informations together, it cannot be tied to one particular area because the gateway service is the specific service to bring some information from the microservices and then aggregate those informations together. So that should be false. Gateway services increase isolation in the system. Isolate gateway services by itself is not kind of making the isolation, but is more to looks like working like a monolith system for the customer's point of view, while the customers using a monolith system that is dealing all things together. Now then, the customer can go to the gateway service that ask the same question that the customer asked to the monolith system, but in the gateway services, instead of it does everything by itself, it asks to each individual service, the microservices to bring those informations and then reform and manipulate those microservices so bring the result to the customer. So isolation in the system is false. Gateway services and increase isolation in the system. Does it make sense? Here, that's some of the logic that allows it to recover to the failure. For example, it might cache some of the data and fall back to a stale cache in the event that service. So basically, what we are doing here, though, is we are creating an additional layer of isolation between our client and our individual microservices. So by itself is another isolation. Does that make sense? Mm, I cannot believe what is trying to say, but fair enough. Um, I was about to read a book before finishing the this page. Maybe tomorrow I'm gonna read a sec. Why forgetting? Uh, wait a sec.
We've indicated that it's important to provide isolation and to continue to operate possible dependencies. But assuming that we
What to
had this
respond?
sort of setup, we at least want to make sure that we didn't bring down the entire system.
I'm not sure why that was not checked. Uh, I've seen that video clip anyway. Um, So instead of start reading a book, I'm gonna finish this one first. Then tomorrow I would start the final exam, and that will take a little bit of time. And the plan to tomorrow would be to finish this uh, lecture and then go to the next one, which reactive microservices introduction.
So we've gone through this journey where we started with a monolithic application and we've broken into microservices. And we saw that when that happened, we did solve some of our issues that we were encountering with the monolithic application, but some issues still remain. Our goal now is to try to take that microservices based approach and make it more reactive. So now we're trying to build not just microservices, but specifically reactive microservices. So in this section, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to look at some of the techniques that we've learned on how we can introduce additional isolation into the system. And we're going to try to figure out how we could apply them here in order to make this system more robust and more reactive.
Is that all? Our microservices version of our application seems to have solved some of our isolation problems, but not all of them. Our job now is to try to find ways to improve the isolation in the microservices solution in order to create a more reactive solution. So we've got this one. It is a load balancing, and then loyalty, order, customers are separated, and then they are connected to the separated databases. True or false? Introducing microservices has given us a form of bulk heading, since each microservice can act as a potential failure zone. True, that's true. That's easily agreed that handling complexity by moving to microservices, we have introduced the complexity into the client application. The client application now has to know about the order, customer, and the loyalty services. It has to send the requests to each and aggregate the result. It also has to deal with the possible failures in each service. We could mitigate, uh, mitigate. We could mitigate this by introducing a gateway service between the client and the individual services, an asynchronous message between the client and the individual services. The asynchronous message is the actual no ideal message method to the for the microservices to make it isolated. So if it is not using a asynchronous message, it's hard to say it is microservices because it depends on the questioning. A bulkhead between the client and the individual services. Once you have individual services, it means that it has a bulkhead, so you don't need to have the additional bulkhead between the client and the individual services. A circuit breaker between the client and the individual services. When saying circuit breaker, it means that the microservices doesn't want to retry whenever they have a failure. The reason is because the microservices uh, doesn't want to have a big load so that it will cascade another problem because of the one failure. So to do this, we brought the circuit breaker to make it work, and then it will go back to the from the closed state to the open state in case it's fail, and then go back to the half open state. And if it tries one more time, once it is successfully done, it goes back to successfully done. It goes back to the closed state. But if it is not, it just go back to the open state. That's what the circuit breaker means. So the first question, the answer of this question should be the first one. Our client application handles timeouts by sending a retry. Even in the absence of retries, if users experience slow response times, they have a tendency to try refreshing a page or application. This results in additional load on an already overloaded application. We can mitigate this by sorry our client application handles timeouts by sending a retry. Even in the absence of retries, if users experience a slow response time, they have a tendency to try refreshing a page or application. This results in additional load on an already overloaded applications. We can mitigate this by introducing a circuit breaker in the client application, as I just explained. For that, circuit breakers. True or false? A circuit breaker is only valuable between the client and the microservices. It would not be helpful to add one between the microservices and its database, because the circuit breaker means to reduce the failure. I don't know. Uh, hmm, let's think about it. While it is a microservice, um, the same idea will happen. Same idea will um, revolve in this situation, because the customer, the client asked to the microservices, and now that microservice asks the information to the database. So it is asynchronous answering an asynchronous message system, while this one is also a synchronous message system. Um, is that okay? In this case, I'm gonna search microservice. No, the advantage of a microservice and the microservice circuit breaker and the microservice architecture. The circuit breaker pattern helps. The circuit breaker pattern helps. Is in closed state, all calls go through the super supplier microservice watch breaker in open state, circuit breaker in half state. So the main reason I think it should be is that um, it is not an, help, it would not be helpful to add one between the microservice and its database. What I'm thinking here is that the circuit breaker is required because it is a synchronous message system. The microservice doesn't answer back to the client right away. So when the client's microservices is stuck in one point, the client will ask it again. But um, for the database, it is a synchronous system still. So whenever I ask the question, it will answer back to the microservice right away. So it doesn't need to, it is not, there is no chance to ask it one more time to the database until the database return the answer. So it should be true. It would not be helpful to add an. So I guess that that is also a part of um, so so when just re considering this system as an A and this system as a B, we don't need to worry about which one is which. So as far as this one asks this and then this one answered to this, the connection between these two systems should have the same advantage and also the same disadvantage because uh, the client and the microservice has the similar situation between the microservice and the database. So yes, the still it is important to have the microservices and the database. Microservices and the database also need to have the monolith. As the circuit breaker. It should have the circuit breaker. Eventually consistent caches. Would an eventual would an eventually consistent cache of the delivery data in the driver's app be acceptable? Eventually consistent cache of the delivery data in the driver's app be acceptable? No, because stable data could result in the incorrect loyalty information. No, because consistent cache. No, because stable data could result in missing or incorrect order items. No, because stable data could result in delivering to the wrong address. Yes, because most changes would not be allowed after the order has left the restaurant. Yes, because most changes would not be allowed after the order has left the restaurant. because stable data could result in the incorrect loyalty information, incorrect order items, wrong address. Updating loyalty. That it was like a trick because while this tree knows, just to say that while it seems like it's different, it just saying that we cannot update the data, whatever it is, and then that's the same result out of three. But I know there is only one answer because this is the radio button. So there is no chance those three, one of those three option could be the answer. So it was obvious. Updating loyalty. A delivery driver has arrived at the customer's door and the customer has presented a loyalty card. The driver attempts to enter the loyalty information into the system with their mobile device, but the system is unresponsive. To mitigate this problem, we could record the loyalty information on the driver's device and upload it when the system is back online. Reject the loyalty card. Wait at the door until the system is back online. Ask the customer to call in their loyalty information in an hour or two. So, because this is the um, isolated system, it should just report the fail. So this one. No, wait a sec. Record the loyalty information on the driver's device and update it when the system is back online. Mm, Wait at the door until the system is back online. Ask the customer to call in their loyalty. So this is this is only the practical approach to deal with the loyalty functionality. Um, Final exam. Okay, we will do this tomorrow. Okay, let's finish this one. Finish, 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 finish. Okay, now let's move on to read a book. After 1 hour read, then I will go back to the. I will go sleep. I will go to bed. So Windows full screen turns on and Windows display capture, Windows capture shows up here, uh, and here turn the timer on and 1 hour start. Sooner or later, I'm gonna change my um, maybe or maybe not, because I don't think it is necessary to show the detail of my book, but more like I'd like to have a better audio quality for you guys in case you are looking at it, or sometimes I'd like to capture one of those films that make some meaningful a video script out of the streaming session. So 1 minute has been passed. So the plan today is within 1 hour, 76, 86, 96, and 106. So till here. This is the plan for today. Put the paper in it. They looked at me like I was the if I uh, would it be better if I this one like this or like it this, so I can change the angle like this. Huh? Now it's very clear. Maybe I can try it this way. So put it to here and put this book to here and a little bit more after. Wait a second. After turning this one, I can turn this one like this. Okay. Oh, what is that desk there? That one, Fudge sat there, pointing across the shop. Don't point. Over the hatch hole there for a minute. Then looked back, but then he did a double check. No, he said, I can't be. Are you telling me your cousin Howie Hodge? Seems like it is useless, but no, not that. And you are cousin Toby, aren't you? Cousin Toby? Toby? Fudge said. I was thinking exactly the same thing, but I don't always say what I am thinking the way Fudge does. I'm known as one now. Dad told cousin Howie. Cousin Howie gave Dad a friendly punch in the shoulder. Lost a few pounds since we last met, huh? You were a real butterball in those days. He left a big tub of lard. Dad sucked in his gut and stood up really straight. You got to work out that tub, Howie said, sticking his finger in Dad's gut like that was the Pillsbury doughboy. I do work out, Howie. Dad got a funny look on his face then, like he suddenly wished he'd told this guy he must be mistaken, like he had no long-lost cousin named Howie. Well, maybe you got to work hard, Cousin Howie said. Run a marathon or two. That struck me as weird, because that was a lot less flabby
flabby looking than cousin Howie, who had shifted his focus to Fudge and me. I stood up straight, shoulders back, stomach tight. See, that's why we used to call him Tubby, cousin Howie said, as if we didn't get it by now. So, Tub, these handsome boys belong to you? Dad said, yes, this is my family, my wife, and cousin Howie kissed Mom's hand. So, you were the little lady who stole Tubby's heart. Mom looked like she might puke. And these are my sons. Dad said Peter and Fudge. Fudge, cousin Howie said. Now there is a name. Actually, it's fairly Folly and Relax. Dad said we just call him Fudge. Folly Deluxe. Cousin Howie's voice was so loud I backed away. What a coincidence! Fudge pulled me aside. What a coincidence, he asked. It's like when something just happens, something you didn't expect. We didn't expect Cousin Howie, did we? No, I told him. We definitely didn't expect Cousin Howie, but he's more a surprise than a coincidence. Cousin Howie wasn't alone. He introduced us to his wife, Adora, a chalky woman with freckles, a doll's mouth, and straw-colored hair. Sweetheart, he said, I want you to meet my long-lost cousin, Toby Hatcher. Warren, Dad said, with a tight smile on his face. Uh, right you are, Cousin Howie said. You keep remembering me, and eventually I remember. Daddy took a deep breath while Adora gushed. I have heard so much about you over the years, Toby. Warren, Dad said again. My name is Warren. Oh, of course, she said, laughing. You didn't go by your boyhood nickname anymore, would you? I mean, imagine a grown-up called Tubby. That would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Actually, Dad told her. Howie is the only person who ever called me Tubby. Is that right, Howie said. And I always thought everybody called you Tubby. Aldora smiled sweetly and told Dad, what a shame you lost touch when Howie's family moved to Hawaii. I know how much Howie's missed you. After that, she took Mom's hand and said, I feel as if we're personally connected, don't you? Before Mom had a chance to answer, before she could say, why no, I don't feel personally connected at all. Why would anyone in her right mind feel personally connected to you and Cousin Howie? Aldora gushed. This is just so wonderful. We didn't think we had any family left, and to find you this way out of the blue. She pulled Mom close and hugged her until Mom was practically gasping for breath. Mom looked at Dad for a gasping when suddenly Fudge said it's a real coincidence. Adora looked surprised. Why, yes, it is a real coincidence. I thought it was a pretty weird coincidence since Dad's never mentioned anything about a cousin Howie to us. And there were still more family members to meet. Eldora whistled, and the two girls about my age came over. Boys, she said to Fudge and me, meet your long-lost cousins, Flora and Fauna Hatcher. They are named for the natural beauty of our islands, and and that's just what we call them, our natural beauties. Fudge laughed. Uh, it came out and sounds like a big kick-up. I gave him an elbow, and he covered his mouth with his hand. Isn't he the one who told me we don't laugh at people's name? And that I didn't feel like laughing over Flora and Fauna too, but I was into proving I could control myself. It was part of my new 7th grade maturity. Edward went back to talking with Mom and Dad, leaving Fudge and me with the natural beauties. We're twins. One of them said identical. In case you didn't notice, the other one added. Uh, you want to know how to tell us apart? The first one asked. By your fingerprints, Fudge asked. In case you don't have access to our fingerprints, the second one said. I'm Flora and I have a scar on my chin. She stuck out her chin and pointed underneath to her scar. See? Then the other one said, I'm Flora and I have a brown dot in my right eye, but you have to look really close to see it. Who's want to? Who would want to? I was thinking as Fudge stood on the tiptoe and peered into Flora's right eye. How old are you? Flora asked. He's 12, Fauna said, uh, stretching back to her. Stretching back to her full height, which was just a little taller than me. How do you know that? I asked her. I can always tell, Fauna said. How old are you? I asked. How old do you think? Fauna said. I'm not into guessing. I told him. He's not into guessing. Fauna repeated to Flora and they giggled. Why do girls giggle? I mean, um, do they really find things so hysterically funny, or are they born that way? Wanna know how old I am? Fudge asked. He didn't wait for them to answer. I'm five, but I'll be six soon. I'm in the mixed group. What's mixed group? Laura asked. It was what comes after kindergarten if you're really smart. Fudge told her. Pete's in 7th grade. That's what grade would be in. Would be in. Flora said. If we want school. If we went to school, Flora said, finishing for her. You'd go to school? You don't go to school, Fudge asked. We're homeschooled. Flora said, what? Our parents teach us at home. Flora explained. Who else is in your class? Fudge asked. No one. They answered together, except our brother sometimes hangs around. Flora said. That's when I realized the little boy hiding behind her was a part of the family. He's almost four, Fauna said, and even though you can't tell, our mother is pregnant again. Flora whispered. Our mother was pregnant one time. Fudge said, also whispering. Only one time? Flora asked. She and Fauna looked at each other and giggled again. Isn't that right, Pete? How about 3 times? I said once with me, once with you, and once with sister. Oh, I forgot about the you and me part. Fudge said. Then he danced around singing. I know the way. I know how the baby got inside. We all do, I said, stopping him before he got started. This time, Flora and Fauna actually laughed. Then Flora stepped aside and said, this is our little brother, and if you think we have interesting names, wait till you hear his. It's fairly relaxed. Fauna announced. Fairly relaxed? Fudge said, that's my name. It can't be. Flora told him. Well, it is. Fudge said, hands on his hips. But it's an old family name. Fauna said, yeah, well, our fathers and cousins, remember? I said, you mean Flora? began. That fairly deluxe hatcher, Fauna said, was your father's uncle, just like he was our father's uncle. Flora finished, for both of them. I nodded. We call him Fudge, I said, and they call me Fudge. Fudge repeated. Everybody, but my little sister calls me Fudge. She calls me Foo, but that's just because she can't say Fudge. Fudge. That's a great name. Fiona said. We've been trying to come up with a good name for a family. Flora said. And Fudge is perfect, Fiona added. He can't have my name. Fudge told them. He already does. I reminded him. He was the Folly Deluxe party, but not the Fudge. Fudge planted his feet wide apart and prepared to do battle. You can call him Folly, or you can call him Deluxe, or you can call him FD, but you can't call him Fudge. And that sounded familiar. I was wondering where I'd heard it before, when Fudge nudged me and said, remember when Ratface said that, Pete? Oh yeah, I thought Ratfat, his first kindergarten teacher. Then I started to laugh. A little Folly growled, my name belongs to me, Fudge told them, in case there was any doubt. I own it. I own it. You can't own a name, Flora said. Can't you? Fudge insisted. A little Flora. Folly growled again. Fudge looked at him. Can't he talk? Of course he can talk, Flora said, but he doesn't have to because, Flora said, we say everything for him. Flora finished the sentence. Having a conversation with the natural beauties was like watching two guys playing a video game. You got dizzy from trying to follow it. When little Folly growled a third time, Fauna said he likes to pretend he's a bear or a lion. Flora added, I don't care if he's a bear or a lion. Fudge told him he can't have my name. This time, little Folly bared his teeth. I think we should call him a Fudge lad, Fauna said to her sister, or Fudgekin. Flora suggested. Or I like that, Fauna said. She put her arm around her little brother. Why don't you just call him Minnie? I said, Minnie? Flora said, as in mouse? Um, Fauna asked. No, I told him, as in Minnie Fudge, in case they still didn't get it. I spelled in for them. M-I-N-E-N-I, Mini Folly, Fudge shouted, because there's only one Fudge, and that's me, Mini Folly, got down on all fours, growled at Fudge, then up, attacked, grabbing Fudge's pants leg in his mouth. Fudge tried shaking him off, but Minnie held on, pulled and twisting until Fudge lost his balance and crashed to the floor. As he did, he let out a blood-curdling scream that got the attention not only of all four parents but everyone else in the gift shop. Stop that folly! Flora shouted as Fana pulled him off Fudge. Dad rushed to Fudge, kneeled beside him, and checked his leg. Dad, Fudge cried, tell them they can't steal my name. Nobody's stealing your name, Dad said, trying to soothe him. Promise? Fudge asked, wipe his nose with his sleeve. Actually, Funa said, we are just borrowing it. No fair, Fudge said. You have to ask it for you want to borrow something, right, Dad? That's how it's usually done, Dad agreed. Then let's just say we are Flora began, looking at her sister, copying her name. Fauna said, copying? Fudge asked. Yes, Flora said, and copying is the highest form of flattery. If you want to copy, you have to pay $2 million, Fudge told me. The natural beauty laughed. Your brother's hilarious, Fauna told me. Don't you know the best things in life are free? Flora asked Fudge, as if that was some kind of a cue. The natural beauties put their heads close together, humming a note, and next thing I knew, they started singing right there in the middle of the gift shop. The moon belongs to everyone, the best things in life are free. The stars belongs to everyone that gleam there for you and me. I backed away, hoping to disappear into the crowd that had gathered around them, and this was worse than Fudge's tantrum at the shop store. I never should have come to Washington. Washington. I should have stayed in New York with their grandma or gone to Jimmy Fargo's. Anything but this, absolutely anything. Finally, I was saved by the guard who came over and suggested that if we were finished shopping, we might like to continue the shop elsewhere. Yes, thank you, guard. Thank you for saving me. So, it's like a big challenge to finish one page in 2 minutes for me still. Um, I'm not sure if I can finish um, in the meantime. Let's keep trying. Uh, Everglades. That said, that sounds exciting. Go this way. nice job. So considering I can read one page per 2 minutes, I can finish 15, 16, 16, 17 pages, which will 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 76, 86, 96. Is that correct that I still need to have some more pages to read before 1 o'clock? Uh, Even it is not 30 pages yet. That's funny. Yeah, boys. So, set to read the 17th page, so I can read it till here, which is maybe fair enough. But anyway, so Genesis wanted to hear that because now said that never expected you to sell out. What did you sell that? What you asked? How much did you get for it? Here we let's go this way. Shoot. During the show, Minnie buried his face in his ice cream bowl and left out what was left of his ice cream sundae. Snowy and Alrata didn't notice, not even want to Minnie reached for the side of the hot fudge and left that up too. He reminded me of Joel. That's exactly what it does when you give him leftover scrambled eggs. When the natural beauties finished their act, everyone in the coffee shop applauded. Even our waiter, Aldra, beamed. They've been performing since they were six. She told us they are known across the Hawaii Island as the Hatchers. Heavenly Hatchers. This was even more embarrassing than I thought when they were brought the bill that corrected my trip. He said, last night I didn't grab you. I didn't know. I didn't get to tell you. The phone was customized. She asked me to show how I solved my problem. I kept trying, but I couldn't get the right answer. Then I was a small plane. It was so dark, and I could see the pile of face. I have no idea who he was until he said, "So Pete." That's when I jumped, even though I had no uh, parachute. As I fell, I passed the natural beauties who were slowly floating down. Catch him. And Flora said, what for? Fauna asked. And then I woke up. My heart was racing. I checked my watch. It had only been 20 minutes since Mom turned out the lights at 8 next morning. then delivered the fudge and me to Cousin Howie. Howie was dressed in his park ranger uniform, sitting in the driver's seat of an official golf cart at the entrance to the zoo. You see, Tab, if you were a ranger, you could get special privileges to address next to him with Minnie in her lap at the natural sunset in the back. Hope about boys, hop aboard boys, Howie called the police. Sorry, we can't invite you to join us, Dub, but we're at the limit now. That didn't look at all sorry. He could go with us. Keep an eye on Fudge, Peter. He called as he dashed off. I wanted to run after him, going to a museum with him, and the mom had to be better than this. But before I had the change, Howie floored them. Hang on, everybody, he sang as he newly mowed down a group of early morning joggers. Fudge grabbed a hold of uh, grabbed a hold of me as we zoomed along the road through the zoo. At one shape on a sharp curve, the golf cart almost doubled. Minnie laughed like crazy. The natural beauty shrieked, and the one next to me, I think it was Flora, grabbed my arm and dug her fingernails into my flesh. On the next curve, she practically, practically ended up in my lap. She cried at Daddy, slow down, but Cousin Howie yelled, Eep, Eep, as she rolled and curved and drove like a total menace. Yippee! Minnie yelled over them finally. Aurora shouted, Howie, think of the example you're setting for our children. Cousin Howie slammed on the brakes. I got curious about her for a minute. Cousin Howie said, what do we do when we get carried away? Uh, we stop and counted to 10. The natural beauty said it sounds amazing. Cousin Howie asked, we counted 10 again. Said, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Cousin Howie said, let's walk out together. He took a deep breath and they counted to 10. The natural beauties counted all over them. I don't hear everybody counting. Cousin Howie said, turning, turning to look at me and Fudge. Then, this time, we counted along with the others, and when we got to 10, Minnie kicked his feet and shouted, Yippee again, goodbye, good, very good, Cousin Howie said. Well, later, when we met with Mom and Dad, Fudge said, look what Cousin Alpha got for me at the Panda gift shop. He held out a tiny stuffed panda. I'd about the same one for Toothy. Held out Paula Veldora to buy you a souvenir. Mom said it's not the one I wanted. Fudge said the one you wanted cost $474. I told Mom and Dad it was life size. Fudge is such a spring. Flora said I've never met anybody like him. Flora said who else I don't. And look at it. Look at that. Fudge had a waving certificate in my mom's face. I'm a member of the Panda Club. The Panda Club, Mom said, yes, I'm the only one who sniffed the poop and held it in my hands. It was well, that's true. He was the only one who still hold it and we all sniffed it, but then it was before we knew what it was. We thought it was a peeled sweet potato. It was the same color as a potato. It was shaped like one too. So how are we supposed to know it was poop? It smelled like grass to me. That was before I found out grass and bamboo smell a lot like Jane the panda keeper. I learned about jobs or something. When I get enough money, I'm going to buy my own bed. It told them, where will you keep it? Generally asked. My apartment will have a very big apartment with a panda room, and when it snows out, I'll walk my panda in Central Park. Mom will cook him sweet potatoes, and I will have another room filled with them. And I'll take him his food to school for sharing and to let all kids sniff it, especially rich water. Even though they look soft and cuddly, they are still wild animals. They have claws and sharp teeth. You know why their heads are so big? Because pandas are born to chew. Their jaws are so strong they can crunch bamboo, and they use their hands like raccoons do. It sounds as if you learn a lot this morning. That's the Jane. The Jane said I was a very good listener, and I guess what else? We got to feed the carrots to the pandas. Everyone but me, he ate the carrot himself. To the train station in his mind. On the way, we passed the White House. If that Obama were presented as president, I thought this is where I would live. I'd ask Jimmy to come down to and out with with ball and swim and have a soccer slide it down the longest hallways. Then we'd see movies in the screening room, and the family chief would make up a proper corn. I'd give just one interview a week, maybe two, on LTV or Nickelodeon. I'd have an opinion on everything, especially books, video games, Muslim music, the internet, and movies. When Peter Hatcher shaken, Young America listens, and that's what they'd say about me. I was enjoying my fantasy until Fajr closed and whispered. I wonder what the president said. What about the banana on that lady's suit? Probably he didn't even notice, and if he did, he'd be too polite to mention it. You know what, Peter? Pete, Fudge said, looking out the window of the van. Someday this will all be mine. What'll all be yours at the place, he said, and we passed the Lincoln, Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Museum and Monument. It'll called Washington Dam. Hold your breath, I told him. Hold my breath, Peter, unless I'm underwater. Wow, it's like it exhausting. Uh, Especially because I'm trying to read out loud. So maybe I'm gonna finish my streaming for now, but I will keep read it later on before tonight, before I go to bed.